At my daughter's wedding, right before she was to walk down the aisle, her fiancé grabbed me by the arm, smiled wide in front of 200 guests, and shoved my face into the wedding cake. "Try the dessert, Mother," he laughed. Frosting blurred my vision. Gasps echoed. My heart raced, not from the sugar, but the sting. I have diabetes. I shouldn't have been near that cake, much less inside it. But what really made the room spin wasn't the buttercream. It was the laughter. His laughter. Her silence. I stood there, humiliated, dripping in vanilla and shame. But he made one critical mistake. He thought I was poor. He thought he could humiliate me without consequence. 5 minutes later, he realized just how wrong he was. And everyone else in that luxurious room? They realized it too late. Catherine Doyle had lived in the same cozy 2-story cottage on the edge of Maplewood, New Jersey, for over 40 years. Its creaky floorboards and mismatched curtains told stories no stranger would ever hear. Her husband's old fishing hat still hung by the back door, and her daughter Emily's high school trophies still lined the mantel. After Robert passed away 6 years ago, the house felt quieter, but never quite empty, filled instead with the quiet echoes of a life well lived. Catherine, now 68, had become accustomed to the rhythm of solitude, morning walks, crossword puzzles, and tea steeped just right. Until the phone rang that Tuesday morning. She was folding laundry when the ringtone echoed through the hall. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but answered on the third ring. "Hello?" "Mom," came the familiar bubbly voice of Emily Doyle, 32, ambitious, independent, living in Manhattan. "Guess what?" Catherine smiled despite herself. "You got the promotion?" "Better," Emily said, barely able to contain herself. "I'm engaged." Catherine blinked. "You're what?" I know, fast, right? But Logan proposed last night at Central Park. It was perfect." Catherine sat on the edge of the couch, holding the phone with both hands. "Tell me everything." Emily gushed about the ring, the proposal, the sunset, the violinist who'd appeared out of nowhere. "He got down on one knee, Mom, right by the lake." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart." Catherine's voice was warm, but her chest tightened. Logan Rivers. She'd heard the name before. A finance heir from an old money family, Logan was handsome, well-educated, and very used to getting his way. Emily had mentioned him only briefly in past calls, always dancing around the details. "I can't believe it," Catherine said softly. "My baby's getting married." There was a pause on the line. Catherine heard the hesitation before Emily spoke. "Mom, there's something I want to ask you." "Of course, anything." "You know how Logan's family is, right? They're different, traditional, very proper. They're not bad people, they're just used to a certain lifestyle." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "They're planning this huge engagement dinner and then a big wedding in the Hamptons. It's kind of a lot, and, well, I was hoping you wouldn't mention too much about your current situation." "My current situation?" "I just mean, maybe don't talk about the cottage or the car breaking down or—" "The cottage where I raised you?" Catherine asked, her tone still gentle. "I know it sounds bad," Emily said quickly. Logan's parents can be judgmental. His mother is all about appearances and his father is intense. I want everything to go smoothly and they already have this idea of what my background should be." "And the truth doesn't fit that idea?" Catherine asked quietly. Emily was silent for a beat. "It's not like that. I just don't want them making assumptions. I love you, Mom. You know that." Catherine stood and walked toward the kitchen, her fingers tightening around the phone. The morning light streamed through the window, catching dust in the air. "So you'd prefer I not be me?" "No." Emily's voice cracked, just a little more polished. "Please, just for a little while. For me." Catherine closed her eyes. Her heart ached, not just at the request, but at the quiet shame beneath it. She'd worked 2 jobs to put Emily through college, skipped vacations so Emily could go to summer camp, sacrificed without complaint, and now her only child was asking her to hide that life. But Catherine didn't say any of that. Instead, she let out a soft breath and said, "I'll do whatever you need." Emily sounded relieved. "Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd understand. You always do." After they hung up, Catherine stood by the kitchen window for a long while, staring out at the bird feeder Robert had built. A sparrow pecked at seeds, fluttering its wings. Her hands trembled slightly, not with anger, but with something harder to name. Disappointment, perhaps. Not in Emily. In time. In how quickly love could be polished into embarrassment when money entered the room. On the fridge, a faded photo of Emily in her high school graduation gown smiled back at her. Catherine reached out and pressed her fingers to it. "Always for you," she whispered. Catherine stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the soft navy dress she'd ironed twice that day. Modest, classic, nothing extravagant, just like her. She slipped on a pearl necklace, a gift from Robert on their 20th anniversary, and applied a light touch of lipstick. Tonight she would dine with the Rivers family. She glanced at her old jewelry box, where bank statements were neatly hidden beneath faded love letters. Her investments, started decades ago with careful savings and risk, had grown quietly. Few knew Catherine Doyle was a millionaire, with holdings in renewable energy and early tech startups. She lived modestly by choice, not by necessity. Money had never been her identity. It was a tool, not a mirror. But tonight, she would wear the mask her daughter asked of her. The Rivers estate was everything she expected. Grandiose columns, ivy-wrapped fences, a marble foyer bigger than her entire house. A doorman in white gloves opened the door with a tight smile. "Ms. Doyle?" "That's me," Catherine replied with a nod. Inside, chandeliers glittered like starlight. A string quartet played softly in the distance. She was led to the dining room where the Rivers family waited. Logan, tall and confident in tailored charcoal, flanked by his parents. Gregory Rivers, silver-haired and stern. Miranda Rivers, elegant and razor-sharp in pearls. Emily stood to greet her mother, hugging her with a brief stiffness that didn't escape Catherine's notice. "You look lovely, Mom." "Thank you," Catherine smiled. "You too." Introductions were swift, handshakes cool. Dinner began with small talk and expensive appetizers. Catherine made polite conversation, steering away from questions about her work or where she lived. But the jabs came anyway, small sugar-coated barbs wrapped in etiquette. "So, Catherine," Miranda began, slicing into her seared scallops, "Emily tells us you live in Maplewood, was it?" "Yes, a quiet little town." "Oh, charming. And do you rent or own?" "I've owned my home for quite some time." "Lovely," Miranda said, her smile tight. "And it must be quaint. So few people can afford property these days. You must have gotten lucky." Catherine took a sip of water. "I've always believed in planning ahead," Gregory grunted softly. "That's admirable. In our circles, most people focus on asset diversification." Logan chuckled. "I'm guessing your assets are pretty straightforward, huh?" Emily winced slightly but said nothing. Catherine kept her voice steady. "I suppose you could say that." As the main course arrived, steak aged for 30 days, paired with wine older than some marriages, Miranda leaned in. "We've reserved the Grand Pavilion in the Hamptons for the wedding," she said. "Naturally, everything will be top tier. Emily deserves the best. Of course, we understand if you can't contribute." "She's contributed plenty," Emily said quickly. Miranda waved it off. "Oh, I didn't mean it that way. I'm sure your mother has done her best." The words hung in the air, heavy. Catherine caught the waiter's glance. Sympathy, maybe, or pity. She looked to Emily, who stared at her plate, silent. Not a word in her defense. Not even when Logan added, "The dress fittings alone cost more than most cars." That stung, not because of the money, but because Emily didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't say, "That's enough." The silence spoke louder than any insult. Catherine smiled thinly and pushed her vegetables around the plate. The room blurred slightly around the edges. She could have shut them down in a second. Could have mentioned her portfolio, her stake in Green Solar Technologies, or her private equity firm in Boston. Could have listed the property in Vermont or the cabin in Tahoe she hadn't visited in years. Could have told them about the private school Emily had gone to, paid in full by a mother who skipped vacations and gourmet meals for decades. But she said nothing, because Emily had asked. After dessert, some overpriced chocolate construction designed more for Instagram than flavor, Miranda sighed contentedly. "Well, I suppose we've covered everything. It's lovely to finally meet you, Catherine. You've done well with so little." Emily didn't flinch. The car ride home was quiet. Catherine sat in the passenger seat of Emily's luxury sedan, watching Manhattan lights blur past. Neither of them spoke until they reached the bridge. "You okay?" Emily asked. "I'm fine." "They're just used to their world?" Catherine turned to her, voice calm. "And which world are you in now?" Emily hesitated. "I didn't mean to." "I know what you meant." They arrived at Catherine's modest home. As she stepped out, she paused. "Do you remember when you were 10 and I turned down that job in Chicago?" Emily blinked. "What job?" "It was a high-paying offer, executive role, came with a penthouse, a driver, private schools, but I turned it down." "But why?" "Because I wanted you to grow up normal, to know people, not just places, to have character, not just access." Emily didn't reply. "I've spent years keeping things simple for you, and tonight I watched you let them treat me like furniture." "That's not fair." "No," Catherine said. "What's not fair is that I gave up the world to protect your character, and tonight you watch them strip mine. She opened the car door and stepped out. Inside her home, she sat down at the same wooden table where Emily had once spilled glue and cried over math homework. She looked at the worn edges, the chipped corners, the life she chose, and how easily it had been dismissed. The Riverstone was a place whispered about in glossy magazines and murmured across high society charity galas. A Michelin-starred cathedral of cuisine nestled in the heart of Manhattan. Velvet drapes, hand-painted ceilings, and tables lit with individual chandeliers transformed dining into theater. Catherine stepped into its soft golden glow like someone entering another world. Her simple black dress and understated heels felt almost comical against the diamonds, silk, and bespoke tailoring adorning every other guest. A maitre d' in a tuxedo led her through the labyrinth of opulence. "Right this way, ma'am. The Rivers party is awaiting you in the private salon." Private. Of course. The doors opened into a room that looked like Versailles had mated with a modern art museum. Eldon Rivers, silver hair sculpted immaculately, rose halfway from his chair. "Catherine," he greeted, cool and measured. "Glad you could make it." Seated already were Miranda, who offered a disinterested nod, Logan in a designer suit, and Emily, beautiful but visibly tense. She stood quickly and kissed Catherine on the cheek. "I saved you a seat." Beside the waiter's station, Catherine smiled as if it didn't sting. Menus, thick as novels, were placed in front of them, though no one really read them. Orders were given as declarations. Wagyu, rare, the truffle risotto, of course. As if a test of sophistication, Catherine simply said, "Salmon, please," and ignored the slight arch of Miranda's perfectly threaded eyebrow. Eldon swirled his wine glass. "We were just talking about the wedding," he said. "Logan's mother has some incredible ideas. The grand pavilion will be spectacular." "It's really coming together," Logan said, grinning at Emily. "Everyone who matters will be there." Catherine tilted her head. "Everyone who matters?" Miranda laughed lightly. "Oh, Logan just means our social circle. It's all rather exclusive, you understand." Catherine took a sip of water. "Of course." Emily shifted in her seat. "We're thinking of a classic color palette. Ivory and gold. Clean, timeless, And Mom, maybe you could help with the floral arrangements? Catherine smiled. I'd love that. Miranda tilted her head. You garden, Catherine? A bit. How quaint, she said, the compliment thinner than the wine glass in her hand. Small talk floated like polished daggers. They discussed auction prices for vintage wines, ski resorts in Switzerland, and the architectural tragedy of affordable housing. Catherine said little, observed much. The appetizer course arrived, smoked scallops with caviar pearls. Catherine moved them around on her plate. Eldon cleared his throat. You know, he began, directing his words at Logan, but loud enough for all, there are certain expectations when joining families, social alignment, if you will. Logan nodded, not looking at Catherine. Eldon continued, some guests are delightful additions to events, but not every guest is suitable for a permanent seat at the table, if you catch my meaning. Miranda smiled, the kind that cuts. Catherine understood the meaning clearly. She was merely a tolerated ornament, not an accepted addition. She looked at Emily. Emily looked down. Silence fell like velvet over the table. I suppose it depends on the table, Catherine said quietly. Eldon arched an eyebrow. Pardon? Whether the table values wood grain or polish, sturdiness or sparkle. Logan laughed, but it sounded hollow. Well, ours is mahogany, Italian. Catherine smiled politely and went back to her salmon. Miranda turned to Emily. Darling, you'll need to finalize the guest list soon. We need to make sure it's balanced. Emily nodded. Of course. Don't worry about it, Eldon said. We'll cover everything. We understand you and your mother have done what you could. Catherine's hand froze around her fork. Done what you could. She was being slowly erased, reduced to someone who'd merely managed to survive, who brought nothing to the table but sentiment. No legacy, no strength, just presence. Emily opened her mouth. Dad, it's fine, Catherine interrupted. Her tone was gentle but final. I appreciate the generosity. Eldon leaned back, pleased. Logan's future is bright. Partnerships, equity, even politics. We simply want to ensure his foundation is solid. Catherine met his gaze. Foundations are only as strong as the people who build them. Another silence, this one colder. Dessert was served, tiny cubes of deconstructed tiramisu plated like modern art. Catherine didn't touch hers. As coffee arrived, Eldon raised his glass. To family and to knowing our place in the world. Catherine's lips curved. Indeed. Emily's eyes flicked toward her mother. There was guilt there, but buried under fear. Fear of offending Logan. Fear of disrupting the perfect picture she'd been sold. As they stood to leave, Logan clapped Eldon on the shoulder. Great dinner, Dad. We'll do brunch next week? Of course. Catherine followed behind, her heels echoing softly against the marble floors. Outside, a valet brought around the river's black Mercedes with robotic precision. Emily turned to her. Thank you for coming. Catherine smiled softly. Of course. I know it's a lot. Yes. Emily fidgeted. Please don't take it personally. They're just set in their ways. I'm not offended, sweetheart, Catherine said, touching her hand. Just observing. Emily hesitated. Okay. I'll call you tomorrow? Catherine nodded. Good night. As she walked to her own car, a simple sedan parked 4 blocks away, Catherine allowed herself a long exhale. They had seen a version of her, and that version had passed their test, not because she was accepted, but because she was ignored. She had played the role Emily requested, but beneath her ribs, something coiled. The woman they had dismissed tonight, she realized, was the same one who had once negotiated million-dollar deals in New York boardrooms. The same woman who'd raised Emily alone, who paid for her education in full, who built an empire brick by quiet brick. They didn't see her, but they would. The days after the Riverstone dinner passed in a quiet, weightless fog. Catherine moved through her routines, watering the hydrangeas, reading the paper, warming up leftover stew. Yet everything felt slightly off-kilter, as if someone had tilted the floor beneath her and she was still trying to find balance. Then came the brunch, a weekend event at the Urban Club, one of Manhattan's oldest private institutions, hosted by a friend of the Rivers family. It was meant to be a casual engagement celebration, though the dress code required pearls and pressed collars. Catherine received the invitation secondhand, a polite, "You're welcome to come if you like," from Emily. She came, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to see how far her daughter would let things go. The Urban Club smelled of cigars and polished mahogany. The brunch took place on the third floor, beneath oil paintings of dead men in powdered wigs. Catherine arrived in a pale gray dress and low heels, once again understated among the sea of couture and cologne. She was handed a mimosa and guided to a small table near the back, where she spotted Miranda in an emerald green pantsuit, laughing too loudly. Logan was at the center of a conversation with a group of young men, including a clean-shaven, well-fed type who introduced himself to Catherine minutes later as Urban. "Urban Chandler," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Logan's best man." "Catherine Doyle," she said, shaking it. "Ah, the famous mother. Emily talks about you all the time." Catherine arched a brow. "Does she?" Urban chuckled. "She's a marvel, your daughter. Self-made, completely independent. Came up through law school on grit alone. Impressive stuff." Catherine's hand froze around her mimosa glass. "I mean," Urban continued, unaware, "not many people in our circle really work for anything. But Emily? She clawed her way up. Told us how she paid her way through school. Loans, internships, side jobs. Total grind. That's the kind of tenacity we love to see." The mimosa tasted bitter on her tongue. She forced a smile. "Yes, very tenacious." Urban drifted away, and Catherine sat still. The room suddenly too bright. The jazz trio in the corner blurred into static. Her daughter, her only child, had rewritten their history. Omitted the years Catherine worked double shifts as a hospital clerk and part-time bookkeeper, the nights she sold her engagement ring to make a tuition payment, the times she skipped meals to cover textbooks. Emily hadn't just hidden her, she'd erased her. And in doing so, she'd painted herself a heroine in a story Catherine had written in blood. Catherine stood, murmured an excuse, and made her way to the powder room. Inside the marble-tiled sanctuary, she stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked composed, elegant, ageless in that quiet, deliberate way money often imitates. But her eyes, sharp, intelligent, wounded, told a different story. She exhaled slowly and reached into her purse. Inside was an envelope she had brought with her on a hunch. Inside the envelope, copies of every tuition receipt, housing payment, scholarship denial, and loan payoff confirmation, all addressed to Catherine Doyle. She had never intended to show them. She still didn't. But now, she would carry them like armor. When she returned to the room, Logan had taken the mic at the front. "Thank you all for coming. Emily and I are beyond lucky to be surrounded by such brilliant, successful people." Applause. Catherine sat quietly at the back. Logan continued, "Emily's story is something I tell often, how she got here on her own. No nepotism, no safety nets, just hard work." Another wave of applause. Catherine watched Emily. She stood at Logan's side, smiling, not correcting him, not even blinking. It wasn't just disappointment now, it was grief. Grief for a daughter she no longer recognized. Grief for every story that had been twisted into fiction. Grief for the sacrifices rendered invisible in the glow of a curated persona. She left before dessert. Outside, the wind bit at her cheeks. She walked for blocks, letting the cold anchor her to the present. At a park bench overlooking the East River, she sat and pulled out her phone, scrolled past emails and reminders until she found the folder labeled Assets. In it, passwords, account details, trust fund drafts, foundation paperwork. Catherine Doyle was not a poor woman. She was not an invisible woman. She was a silent one. And silence, she decided, could be powerful if used correctly. That night she wrote in her journal. Then she wrote a plan. She would not confront Emily, not yet. She would not reveal the truth, not yet. Instead, she would watch. She would give Logan and his family every opportunity to show their true colors, believing Catherine was nothing more than a quaint, fragile widow with no power and no voice. She would become their mirror, and eventually they would hang themselves with their own reflection. Because the only thing more dangerous than a mother dismissed was a mother underestimated. The streets of Manhattan were unusually quiet for a Friday night. Traffic lights blinked against the silence like forgotten signals, and the only sound inside Catherine's car was the rhythmic click of the turn signal as she merged onto the West Side Highway. Emily sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone. The glow of the screen lit up her face, young, flawless, untouched by time or consequence. Catherine gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. She'd kept silent through the brunch, through the lies, through every polished insult and sideways glance thrown her way by the Rivers. But now, with just the two of them in the car and the city slipping by like an afterthought, she couldn't hold back any longer. "I need to ask you something," Catherine said softly. Emily glanced up, tone guarded. "What?" "That story Urban told at the brunch today, about how you paid your own way through college, how you built everything from scratch." Emily blinked, a bead of silence hanging between them. "Yeah, what about it?" Catherine kept her eyes on the road. "Why didn't you correct him?" "I didn't see the point," Emily replied. "It's just a story. It makes me look competent." "It's not just a story," Catherine said, her voice sharper than intended. "It's a lie." Emily scoffed, crossing her arms. "Oh, come on, Mom. It's not like I denied your existence." "No," Catherine said. "You denied my contributions. That's worse." The words landed hard. Catherine could feel the shift in the car's atmosphere, like thunder building behind the dashboard. "I worked 2 jobs," she continued. "I paid for your tuition, your books, your rent." Emily snapped. "And you did it willingly. And that doesn't mean I owe you my whole identity." Catherine's jaw clenched. "You think I did it for recognition?" "No," Emily shot back. "I think you're threatened because I finally have something that's mine." "That's not what this is about, isn't it?" Emily turned fully now, eyes blazing. "You've never liked Logan. You've judged him from the start because he doesn't fit into your cozy little idea of what life should be." "I judge him," Catherine said slowly, "because I see what you don't." "Like what? That he's confident, successful, ambitious? God forbid a man have ambition around you." Catherine pulled the car to a stop at a red light. "Ambition doesn't scare me. Arrogance does. So does cruelty." Emily snorted. "Cruelty? You're being dramatic. You didn't hear the way he spoke to that waiter at brunch. The way his father talks about people like me, like you, before you became acceptable to them. They're just old money types. That's how they are." "That's exactly the problem," Catherine said, "and you're defending it." Emily stared out the window now, lips pressed tight. Her reflection looked older in the glass, hard-edged. Catherine sighed. "I'm just saying, be careful. Logan has all the signs of someone who needs to own the people around him." Emily's head whipped back. "You really think I'm that stupid? I think you're in love, and love makes us blind." "Spare me the wisdom, Mom." Her voice rose, cracking slightly. "You hate that I've found a life outside of your orbit. Admit it." "That's not true." "Yes, it is. You live in that same little house, clipping coupons and pretending virtue is a replacement for ambition. But I wanted more. I earned more. Catherine's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I gave you the tools to want more," she said quietly, "but not to forget where you came from." The light turned green. They drove in silence for 2 blocks. Then Emily spoke again, voice cooler, sharper. "This is jealousy. You can't stand that Logan comes from wealth, that I'm marrying into something you walked away from." Catherine blinked. So that's what this was. She'd known the day would come. The day Emily would question why her mother had chosen a simpler path despite having access to more. She just hadn't expected the accusation to come wrapped in venom. "You think I left wealth because I was scared of it?" Catherine said, almost to herself. "I left because I saw what it did to people, how it hollowed them out." "Not everyone's like that." "Logan is." Emily's voice dropped. "Then maybe I'm like that too." That one hit harder than anything. The car rolled to a slow stop in front of Emily's apartment building. Emily unbuckled her seatbelt without another word. "You're not like them," Catherine said, reaching out instinctively. Emily pulled away. "You don't get to decide that anymore," she said. "You don't get to pull the parent card when I'm finally building a life that doesn't orbit around your fears." "I'm not trying to control you." "Yes, you are," Emily shouted. "You're trying to sabotage the only good thing I've built for myself. That's not what this is." Emily was already stepping out into the cold. She turned back, fire still in her eyes. "Next time you want to offer your warnings, save it. I don't need your permission to be happy." Then the door slammed shut. Catherine sat still for a long moment, heart pounding. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Emily's taillights disappeared down the street, swallowed by a city that no longer felt like home. The night air was colder than usual when Catherine pulled into her driveway. The porch light flickered, casting long shadows across the walkway. The quiet was deafening. No chatter, no sirens, not even the rustle of wind through trees. Just the sound of her own breath, shaky but steady, as she climbed the stairs and unlocked her front door. She didn't turn on the lights. Instead, she walked through the familiar darkness of her home, passing the photo-lined hallway, her late husband's worn recliner, the table where Emily once drew with crayons. These pieces of her life still held warmth, but tonight they felt distant, like artifacts of a museum she no longer belonged to. In the back room, hidden behind a bookcase of gardening guides and dog-eared novels, was the small safe she rarely touched. She knelt, entered the code, Robert's birthday, and opened it. Inside were folders, thick, neatly labeled equities, real estate, startups, emergency. Each one held documents that painted a picture no one outside this house truly knew. Catherine Doyle wasn't just a retiree living in a modest home. She was a silent shareholder in 3 biotech firms, 2 renewable energy companies, and the majority owner of a small startup in Chicago that recently turned down a buyout offer from a major Silicon Valley giant. She had rejected that offer herself. It would have made her richer than she already was, but at the cost of her integrity. The buyer had a history of gutting small teams, outsourcing innovation, and manipulating data. Catherine had founded her first business with ethics as her backbone. Selling to them would have been a betrayal of everything she built. So she walked away, quietly, just like always. She reached deeper into the safe and pulled out a folder marked Legacy. Inside was her will. It hadn't been updated in over 2 years. Back then, she'd planned to leave everything to Emily. But now... Catherine sat at the kitchen table, her reading glasses slipping to the edge of her nose. The pen in her hand hovered over the paper. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was resolute. She began rewriting the terms. Clause by clause, line by line, she amended the distribution. If Emily chose to marry Logan Rivers, the entirety of Catherine's estate, including stocks, properties, and liquid assets, would be redirected to the Doyle Women's Fund, a dormant nonprofit Catherine had quietly set up years ago to one day support single mothers pursuing higher education, a safety net for women like the one she once was. It wasn't a punishment. It was a mirror. She wanted Emily to see the full picture, the costs, the compromises, the truth of what she was marrying into. If Emily still chose Logan, she would do so with open eyes. But she would do it without Catherine's legacy cushioning the fall. By the time the clock struck midnight, the new will was signed, dated, and placed back into the safe. Catherine poured herself a glass of water, her hands steady now. She wasn't declaring war. She was drawing a boundary. Later that night, she opened her laptop and wrote a letter to her lawyer, requesting the changes be formalized and witnessed. Then, in a separate document, she wrote something else, something she hadn't intended to, a letter to Emily. Emily, you were always my why. Every decision I made, every job I took, every night I stayed up worrying over bills or grades or rent, it was all for you. Not for recognition, not for praise, just for the simple hope that you'd grow up free from the burdens I carried. But tonight, I saw you rewrite our history, and I saw myself disappear from the story you told. This isn't about Logan, not really. This is about what you've begun to value. Power over compassion, image over truth. And I worry you've mistaken comfort for character. You think I'm trying to control you. I'm not. I'm trying to protect the person I raised. If you choose Logan, I will not stop you. But I will not fund the erosion of your soul. I'd rather give everything I have to women still fighting to build something from nothing, the way I once did. You don't have to agree. You only have to understand that this is my line, and you've crossed it. With love always, Mom. She didn't send the letter, not yet. Instead, she printed it, sealed it in an envelope, and tucked it inside the folder labeled Legacy, beside the revised will. The next morning, she baked muffins. She watered the front garden. She replied to a neighbor's email about the community fundraiser. From the outside, everything looked the same. But inside, something had shifted. Catherine Doyle wasn't just Emily's mother anymore. She was her own woman again. Quiet, powerful, and no longer afraid to draw the line between love and self-respect. The sun rose gently over the ocean, casting gold across the pristine windows of the Seabreeze Grand Resort, a coastal sanctuary reserved for the elite. Palm trees swayed rhythmically, perfectly timed with the gentle breeze, and white roses lined the cobblestone paths like they had been hand-placed by angels. It was a perfect day for a perfect wedding. Catherine stood at the edge of the resort parking lot, clutching a small beige clutch and adjusting the neckline of a navy blue dress she had owned for nearly a decade. The fabric was soft from years of wear. It was not glamorous, nor was it trendy, but it was hers, and it still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she stored it with. A valet walked past her without offering assistance. She didn't expect to be noticed. Inside the main hall, crystal chandeliers sparkled above imported silk linens. Rows of white chairs were already filling with guests, tall men in tuxedos, women with sculpted cheekbones and heels that cost more than Catherine's monthly groceries. At the check-in table, a young woman in a headset looked up from the guest list. Name? Catherine Doyle, she said calmly. The woman scanned the list and scanned again. I'm sorry, she said, not looking up. I don't see you on here. I'm the mother of the bride. Now the woman looked up, eyebrows lifting in surprise. Oh, 1 second. She whispered into her earpiece, her eyes flicking sideways. Eventually, another coordinator appeared and gestured toward the farthest section of the outdoor seating area. We'll have you seated in the overflow area, just this way. Overflow. Catherine nodded and followed without a word. Her seat was in the last row near the back, partially obstructed by a decorative trellis, covered in vines. She had to tilt sideways just to catch a glimpse of the aisle. From this angle, the wedding looked like something out of a luxury magazine. Rows of precision-cut flowers, violinists, champagne flutes sparkling in the hands of guests who didn't seem to notice the soft blue sky above them. She sat alone. When the ceremony began, Catherine caught only glimpses of Emily in her dress. The bride was radiant, yes, but distant, almost rehearsed. She didn't look toward the crowd, didn't glance back to see her mother. Logan, standing tall and polished at the altar, wore a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. As the officiant spoke, Catherine sat with her hands folded in her lap, surrounded by strangers. Not a single person turned to greet her, not even when the couple was announced as husband and wife, not even when the guests erupted into applause. At the reception, she walked through the marble lobby toward the grand ballroom. Her name was not on the seating chart posted outside the entrance. A staff member noticed her standing alone and approached. "Ma'am, are you with the Doyle party?" "I'm the mother of the bride," she said again, with the same calm dignity. He hesitated. "You may take a seat at table 27, near the back." Again, near the back. Catherine sat at a table with distant acquaintances of Logan's family. They made polite conversation, occasionally glancing at her dress, at her plain shoes, her simple pearl earrings. By the time dinner was served, lobster tail and filet mignon, Logan was already on his third glass of champagne. He stood near the head table, arm around Emily's waist, talking too loudly, laughing at his own jokes. Catherine watched quietly. He tipped his glass toward a passing waiter. "Refill, please," he said, slurring slightly. "It's not a party until someone blacks out." Emily smiled nervously, pulling him closer. "Maybe slow down a bit, babe." Logan waved her off and turned to his groomsmen. "My wife, ladies and gentlemen." "Already trying to control me!" The table laughed. Emily didn't. Later, during the toasts, Logan took the microphone. "To my new family," he said, raising his glass. "To the Rivers for showing me how to live well, and to the Doyles, well, to Emily for breaking out of that mold." A few guests chuckled. Catherine didn't. She sipped her water and sat very still. It was subtle but undeniable, a fracture in the performance. Logan was unraveling. The polished exterior was cracking. And Emily, Catherine's Emily, was standing beside him, smiling through it, pretending not to notice. As guests moved to the dance floor, Catherine excused herself. She walked through the grand lobby, past the valet station, out to the edge of the resort's manicured lawn. There, beyond the hedges and lanterns, the ocean stretched endlessly under the moonlight. She stood alone, listening to the waves. This wedding was no celebration. It was a warning. The ballroom was alive with movement. Couples glided across the dance floor as the string quartet transitioned into a jazzy, upbeat tune. Waiters in black vests weaved through clusters of laughing guests with trays of champagne and canapes. The scent of roses and expensive perfume mingled with the low hum of conversation. Catherine stood near the edge of it all, half hidden behind a towering floral arrangement. She had only returned inside after a long walk by the shore, telling herself she would stay just long enough to say goodbye to Emily. She didn't want a scene. She never did. But fate had other plans. At the center of the room, Logan was on his 6th drink, maybe 7th, and it showed. His cheeks were flushed, his laughter louder, looser. He had taken off his tuxedo jacket and now paraded around in his vest, waving his glass like a conductor's baton. Guests laughed at his jokes, though some eyes were beginning to exchange quiet looks. "Ladies and gentlemen," Logan slurred, climbing onto the low platform near the cake table. "What a night, huh?" A round of applause, some polite, some wary. Emily stood a few feet away, her smile frozen. She touched his arm gently. "Logan, maybe—" He pulled away. "Don't worry, babe. Just one more toast. One more little story." He turned to the crowd. "I want to thank all the people who made tonight possible. My parents, my beautiful wife, and..." His eyes scanned the room. They landed on Catherine. "Ah, yes," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "The ever-humble mother of the bride, the mystery woman in aisle 37. A ripple of awkward laughter. Catherine's fingers curled around her clutch. "Come on up here, Catherine," Logan said, waving her over. "Let's give you a round of applause. You raised a gem." There was no warmth in his tone, just mockery. Emily stepped forward quickly. "Logan, stop!" But he was already moving. In 2 staggering steps, Logan reached Catherine and grabbed her by the elbow. "Come on, don't be shy. You've been sitting all quiet and noble all night." Before she could resist, before anyone could intervene, Logan gave her a playful but forceful shove straight into the wedding cake. Gasps exploded around the room as Catherine stumbled, hands flailing, landing half into the 3-tiered buttercream monstrosity. Time froze. Then, laughter, loud, crude, from a few groomsmen, from distant relatives. The orchestra stopped playing. Catherine stood slowly, cream smeared on her dress, her dignity hanging by a thread. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She simply looked up, eyes locking with her daughter's. Emily's face had gone pale, and then something cracked. Hard. She stormed forward, yanked Logan by the arm, and in front of everyone, friends, family, photographers, slapped him across the face. The sound was sharp, final. The laughter stopped instantly. Logan reeled back, stunned. "Emily, what the hell? You don't touch her," she hissed. "You don't mock her, and you sure as hell don't lay hands on my mother." Silence swept the ballroom like a storm cloud. Then, from a nearby table, a man in a navy suit rose slowly. His name was Charles Whitaker, gray-haired, composed, the kind of man people didn't notice until he chose to speak. He adjusted his cufflinks and looked around the room. "Well," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the space, "I think it's time we clear up a few things." All eyes turned to him. "Catherine Doyle," he continued, "is not just the mother of the bride. She is the principal investor in Whitaker Capital. And Whitaker Capital, as many of you already know, is the majority shareholder in Halverson Group." Gasps echoed. Logan blinked. "Halverson? But yes," Charles nodded. "The very same Halverson Group that owns the parent company of Rivers and Holt Financial. Your company, Logan, the one you keep boasting about." Whispers turned into murmurs. Heads whipped back to Catherine, who stood composed, a bit of frosting on her sleeve, but eyes sharp and unwavering. "In other words," Charles said, smiling slightly, "you've spent the entire night humiliating the woman whose money ensures your paycheck clears." Dead silence. Emily's jaw fell slightly. Logan took a step back, his mouth working soundlessly. Charles turned to Catherine and gave a respectful bow of his head. "Apologies, Miss Doyle. Had I known this party would devolve into such vulgarity, I wouldn't have stayed silent so long." Catherine nodded. "Thank you, Charles." Logan tried to speak again. I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Catherine said, voice calm but resonant. "You didn't care to know, because to you I wasn't worth knowing." Emily stood motionless. Tears welled in her eyes, not from humiliation, but something deeper. Realization. She'd wanted a life free of embarrassment, free of struggle, free of the woman who raised her to be better. And in doing so, she had betrayed the very foundation that allowed her to rise. Catherine turned without another word and walked toward the exit. This time, no one stopped her, and no one laughed. The ballroom was no longer a stage of celebration. The music had stopped completely. Waiters stood awkwardly by the wall, unsure whether to keep serving champagne. Guests whispered behind manicured hands, eyes darting between Logan, Emily, and the now absent Catherine. The cake, what remained of it, was being quietly removed by staff, while frosting still clung to the tiles near the dance floor, like evidence at a crime scene. Logan stood in the middle of it all, alone. His cheeks were still red from the slap, his hands shaking slightly around his half-empty glass. He looked around as if expecting someone, anyone, to come to his defense, but no one did. Emily had disappeared, vanished the moment her mother walked out. Miranda Rivers, usually poised and polished, rushed toward Charles Whitaker with a strained smile. "Charles, darling, I'm so sorry about the scene. Logan had too much to drink. You know how these events get." Charles didn't smile back. "Miranda, I've known you long enough to know you don't tolerate weakness in business. Why would you tolerate it in your son?" Miranda's lips twitched. "He made a mistake." "No," Charles interrupted. He revealed his nature. Beside her, Eldon Rivers looked pale, jaw clenched. He made a move toward Logan, grabbing his arm. "Apologize now." Logan shook him off. "I already tried. She didn't even listen." "You humiliated her in front of everyone," Eldon snapped, voice low and cold. "And you humiliated us. Do you realize what you've just cost this family?" It was no longer about Catherine, not to them. It was about reputation, leverage, power. Charles was watching. The other shareholders were watching. And now the carefully curated image of the Rivers legacy was crumbling because of one impulsive, entitled act. Logan swallowed hard and started moving through the crowd. He pushed past old friends who wouldn't meet his eye, past second cousins who pretended to be engrossed in the wallpaper, toward the exit. Outside, the night air hit him like a slap. He scanned the long circular driveway, spotting Catherine's figure near the valet stand, waiting in silence as her modest sedan was pulled around. He jogged toward her. "Miss Doyle, Catherine, please," he panted. She turned slightly, regarding him with the same measured gaze she'd worn during his worst moments. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," he said quickly. "I was drunk. I was trying to be funny. It was a stupid joke." "It wasn't a joke," Catherine said softly. "It was a display." "I didn't know. About your company, about the investments. If I had, I would have..." Catherine held up a hand. "That's exactly the point," she said. "You needed the weight of my bank account to measure my worth." Logan looked down. I love Emily." "No," Catherine said quietly. "You love owning her. You love how she fits into your image, but you don't love the parts of her that don't shine for others. She's my wife." "Not anymore," a voice said from the shadows. They both turned. Emily stood at the base of the grand staircase, shoes in her hand, makeup smeared. Her wedding dress looked limp, crumpled, her eyes wide with clarity. "I'm done," she said, walking forward. "I was done the moment you shoved her, the moment you made a joke of my family to make yourself feel bigger." Logan reached for her. "Emily." "Don't," she said, stepping back. "Don't say you're sorry. Just don't." Miranda appeared behind her. "Emily, honey, let's not overreact." "I'm not overreacting," Emily said, turning to face her mother-in-law. "I'm finally reacting." Catherine watched her daughter, truly watched her. There was no mask now, no performance, just raw, unfiltered truth. And something like pride began to stir beneath the hurt. Emily turned to her mother. "Can I come with you?" Catherine nodded once. They said nothing else. They walked toward the car together, mother and daughter, scarred but finally walking side by side. Logan stood frozen. The valet pulled around the sedan, and Catherine held the door open for Emily before sliding into the driver's seat. The doors closed. The engine started. And without looking back, they drove away, leaving behind the glitz, the gossip, and the ghost of a wedding that was never truly a union. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few forgotten cars glinting under dim golden lamps. The silence of the night wrapped around the pavement like a blanket, muffling the sound of everything except the hurried patter of bare feet on stone. Emily ran. still in her wedding dress, the hem now streaked with dirt. A heel snapped and dangling from her hand. Her breath came in uneven gasps. Curls of hair stuck to her face with tears and sweat. But she didn't care. She only had one destination in mind. "Mom," she called out, her voice cracking. Catherine had just reached her car when she heard it. She paused, hand on the door handle, and turned. Emily stood a few feet away, dress tattered, chest heaving, mascara running like war paint. "I need to talk to you," Emily said, trying to catch her breath. Catherine didn't speak. She simply opened the passenger side door. Emily slid in without a word. They sat in silence for a long moment, the car cocooned in shadows. Catherine didn't start the engine. She just waited. Finally, Emily broke the silence, voice hoarse. "I didn't know about the company, about any of it." "I know," Catherine said. "I thought you were just normal, modest, frugal." "I am, and I'm also more." Emily looked down at her hands, still trembling. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Catherine looked out the windshield, eyes distant. "Because I didn't want the money to define me, or you." Emily nodded slowly, then looked over. "But why didn't you correct them? Why let them treat you like you didn't matter?" "Because if I had spoken up," Catherine said quietly, "you wouldn't have seen who they really were." That landed like a brick in Emily's chest. She swallowed hard. "I was awful to you. I let them belittle you right in front of me." "Yes," Catherine said softly, "you did." Tears spilled freely now. "I wanted so badly to be accepted, to fit into their world." "You already belonged somewhere," Catherine said. "You just forgot." Emily looked away, ashamed. For a while, there was only the sound of the wind brushing against the car and the low hum of the engine cooling. Then Catherine added, almost as an afterthought, "There's something else you should know." Emily turned slowly. "What?" Catherine reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a sealed envelope. She didn't hand it over, just held it loosely in her lap. "Do you remember Logan's suspension from college? The one he said was for academic burnout?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, he said it was a rough semester." Catherine exhaled. "It wasn't burnout, it was fraud." Emily's eyes widened. He was caught cheating on multiple assignments, but that wasn't the worst of it. He hacked into a professor's email to alter his grade. He was nearly expelled. Emily's mouth fell open. "What? That can't be true. It's in the records, but they were sealed." "Oh, sealed?" "Because I paid for the legal settlement," Catherine said, finally meeting her daughter's eyes. "I did it for you, because you loved him, because I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd grow out of it." Emily was frozen. "I told myself it was a one-time mistake," Catherine continued. "But it wasn't. He manipulated others, lied to investors. You weren't the first person he tried to dazzle with borrowed shine." Emily shook her head slowly, as if trying to rattle the truth loose from her ears. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew all this and still let me marry him?" "I didn't let you," Catherine said. "I gave you space to decide, but I was ready to intervene if it ever became irreversible." Emily's hands curled into fists in her lap. "And it almost was," she said bitterly. "I almost walked into a lifetime with him." "You still can," Catherine said, "if you choose it." Emily turned, eyes burning. "How can you say that?" "Because it has to be your choice, not mine. If I force your hand, you'll never believe it was the right one. But if you walk away now, you'll know it was because you saw the truth." Emily sat back against the seat, staring at the windshield. Her reflection was faint in the glass, a broken bride in a borrowed fantasy. And somewhere in that fog, something inside her shifted. The pieces of the fairy tale were gone now, shattered. But in their place, something real began to emerge. She wiped her face, inhaled shakily, and said, "Take me home." Catherine started the engine. "Back to the resort?" she asked. "No," Emily said, voice firmer now. Home. They drove in silence for several minutes. Then Emily spoke again, barely above a whisper. Do you still have that old blue blanket? Catherine smiled faintly. Folded in the closet. Top shelf. I want that tonight. Catherine reached across and took her daughter's hand. For the first time in years, Emily didn't pull away. The Oregon sky stretched wide and open above them, brushed with soft gray clouds that hinted at early autumn rain. The rental car wound its way through familiar country roads, lined with tall pines, rusted mailboxes, and the occasional wooden fence nearly lost to overgrown grass. It smelled of earth and leaves and quiet redemption. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her face pale but peaceful, her wedding dress traded in for a loose cardigan and jeans. Her hair was tied up in a bun, messy and real. No makeup, no glitter, just her. Catherine didn't speak much during the drive. She didn't need to. The silence between them had changed, no longer cold or distant, but comfortable. Understanding, like two people rowing the same boat after a storm, letting the waves settle before saying what needed to be said. When they turned onto the gravel driveway of the old farmhouse, Emily's breath caught. It looked exactly as she remembered. White wooden siding, a little chipped at the corners, wind chimes singing on the porch, and that stubborn rose bush Catherine refused to dig up, even though it hadn't bloomed properly in years. They got out of the car. The air here was different. Softer, less demanding. It smelled like pine needles and old soil. Like home. Catherine unlocked the door and stepped inside, flicking on the hallway light. The bulb hummed before glowing a warm yellow. Emily followed, her footsteps slow. It was smaller than she remembered, cozier. The hallway still had the photo of her 5th grade spelling bee win, crooked in its frame. The kitchen still had the blue-tiled backsplash they'd installed together one summer, with too much grout and not enough patience, and the sofa still had that dent where Catherine always curled up with a book. Nothing had changed, but Emily had. She lowered her bag beside the front door and stood in the center of the living room like someone re-entering a dream. Catherine's voice broke the quiet. Dinner? Emily nodded. Can I help? Catherine smiled. You can peel the carrots. They moved around the kitchen like they'd done so many times before, chopping, stirring, sharing the silence. Catherine brought out the old clay pot she used for mustard green soup, a simple broth with mustard greens and tofu, simmered with ginger and garlic. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't photogenic, but it was theirs. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the floor, the soup was ready. They sat at the small kitchen table, the one with uneven legs that wobbled slightly if you leaned too hard, 2 bowls, 2 spoons, and a plate of sliced apple for dessert. Emily took a bite. The warmth hit her immediately. Ginger, nostalgia, comfort. She closed her eyes and exhaled. God, I've missed this. Catherine looked at her over the rim of her spoon. You used to hate mustard greens. I hated a lot of things, Emily said quietly, mostly things that reminded me I didn't have what other kids did. Catherine said nothing. Emily continued, I used to think this house was too small, too quiet. I wanted noise and marble countertops and chandeliers. I thought if I had that, I'd be safer, better. She stirred her soup absent-mindedly, but the whole time I was chasing that life, I was walking further away from the only place I ever felt real. Catherine's eyes softened. You wanted something different. That's not a sin. But I lost myself, Emily said, and I lost you. Catherine reached across the table, her fingers curling over Emily's. You found your way back. That's what matters. Emily looked around, the faded curtains, the mismatched mugs, the way the kitchen light flickered when the dishwasher ran. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and suddenly she understood. This is why you stayed, she said softly. All those years, even when you had enough to move anywhere, to upgrade, to impress. Catherine smiled faintly. I stayed because this house never asked me to prove anything. It never wanted me to wear pearls or speak in half-truths. It let me be me. Emily nodded, eyes glassy. They sat in silence, sipping soup, the warmth filling more than just their stomachs. Later that night, they curled up on the couch together under the old blue blanket. Catherine sipped tea while Emily flipped through a photo album from the attic. Birthdays, school plays, snowmen in the front yard. Time folded in on itself in the best way. Emily turned a page and paused. It was a photo of Catherine at her old office, wearing slacks and a cardigan, holding a tiny potted plant with a post-it that said, "Good luck, Mom." "You never told me how hard it really was," Emily said, touching the photo. "You never asked," Catherine said gently, "and I didn't want to burden you." Emily turned the page. "You carried so much." "I carried you. That's not a burden. That's a privilege." The words settled in her chest like a soft stone. She looked up at her mother. "Do you think I can start over?" Catherine took her hand and squeezed it. "Honey, the best people I know have started over more than once." Tears welled again, but this time they didn't sting. They simply fell, quiet and welcome. "Thank you," Emily whispered, "for not giving up on me." "I never could," Catherine said. "You're my why." Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, and inside, two women sat side by side, no longer mother and daughter divided by expectation, but two souls who had finally learned how to meet in the middle. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, painting soft lines of gold across the wooden floorboards. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the kitchen window, and the kettle let out a low, comforting whistle. Catherine stood at the stove, pouring hot water into two chipped mugs, one with a faded heart on it, the other with the words, "World's Best Mom," almost worn away. Emily entered in fuzzy socks, rubbing sleep from her eyes, hair tied in a lopsided bun. She looked younger somehow, freer. "Smells like your Earl Grey," she said, smiling. Catherine turned, offered her a mug. Some things never change. They sat on the back porch, wrapped in flannel blankets, feet propped up on an old wicker table. The backyard was still wild. Catherine had never been one for pruning too much. Birds fluttered near the feeder. Somewhere, a dog barked. For a long time, they sipped in silence. Then Catherine cleared her throat and pulled something from the pocket of her sweater. It was a folder, worn at the edges. Simple. No legal stamps. Just a single word scrawled on the tab. Legacy. Emily looked at it, then at her mother. Catherine handed it over. "I updated everything last night. The trust, the investments, the house, the foundation. It's all yours." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. I thought you were leaving it to the Doyle Fund." "I still am," Catherine said. "But now you'll be the one running it." Emily's eyes widened. "What?" "I built this life from scratch," Catherine continued, "and I've spent most of it quietly building things no one saw. But you know what it's like to lose yourself chasing someone else's dream. You know how easy it is to believe a lie if it's wrapped in the right ribbon." She paused, her gaze steady. "So now I want you to use all this for truth." Emily's voice was barely audible. "What does that mean?" Catherine leaned back, mug resting on her knee. "No penthouses, no luxury cars, no Instagram foundations that are just tax shelters. I want you to use this money to build something real, for women like us, for single mothers, for girls trying to get to college on 3 part-time jobs, for people who never get invited to the table." Emily blinked quickly, tears already forming. "You trust me with that?" "I do," Catherine said simply, "because you came back, and because now, you see." Emily closed the folder gently, setting it on her lap. "I don't even know where to begin." "You'll figure it out. You're my daughter." They both laughed softly, and then Emily looked at her mother again, this time with something new in her eyes. Not just love, not just guilt, but purpose. I want to start in Portland, she said. A women's co-working space, free childcare, financial literacy classes, networking for low-income moms. Catherine raised her eyebrows. You already thought this through. Last night, Emily said, after you fell asleep, I stayed up journaling. It just poured out. Catherine smiled. Then that's your beginning. They toasted with their tea like it was champagne. Later that day, they dug out old boxes from the attic. School projects, family photos, old letters from Emily's father. They laughed over Catherine's 80s hairstyles, cried softly over a handmade card Emily had written in 3rd grade. You're my safe place, Mom. When the sun began to set, they moved to the living room. Catherine put on a cassette of old jazz, and Emily curled up with a sketch pad, already drafting ideas. They spoke about budgets, contacts, grant writing, things Emily had once brushed off as boring, but now felt sacred. They were no longer mother and daughter separated by silence. They were partners. As evening deepened, Catherine brought out a photo from her bedroom. A black and white shot of her younger self, standing in front of her first apartment, holding baby Emily on her hip. Her smile was tired but fierce. Emily studied the photo. She had no idea what was coming, did she? No, Catherine said, but she faced it anyway. Emily nodded. So will I. They didn't need to say anything else. The final image. 2 women on a worn couch, sharing stories, laughter bubbling from their chests like spring water, no diamonds, no titles, just the raw beauty of healing. A circle finally closed. In a world that often values perfection, theirs was a story of repair. And in the quiet hum of that Oregon home, under flickering kitchen lights and the scent of cooling soup, Catherine and Emily found something richer than wealth. They found each other.